and gentlemen, you are most welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I know how busy you all are with your very active schedules. There may be some additional people arriving. Rather amusingly, we did have 3 who accepted from Kuala Lumpur, so we're going to send them a video. It must be the sandwiches, hopefully the topics as well. I'll give a very brief introduction by mentioning the expression first mover advantage. Well, we're not the first mover in having a regulatory sandbox, but that actually is sometimes an incredibly good thing, because there's another expression, time spent in reconnaissance is never wasted. It's what Wellington said before Waterloo, and he defeated Napoleon. So sometimes not going first, but taking a more cautious, measured approach is actually more desirable. And my background as both a regulator, but also being on the receiving end of regulation, is to ensure that we always have very good consultation. And I think it's a credit to the BVI and the Commission that they do consult so actively. And I think it does mean that as a consequence, we may not have the first sandbox ever in the world, but we do have one which is commendable. I will briefly introduce my panelists. It's always a little bit humbling because their pedigree is outstanding. I'll begin with Lisa Liu, who's the president of Bank of Asia, a fully digitized global bank. Lisa's background is remarkably impressive, in excess of 20 years experience in the global financial services industry, now heading a very prominent Bank of Asia, which is obviously based here, but with a global reach. Prior to that, she was the Senior Managing Director and China Country Head of Global Services for State Street Bank. And prior to that, she had a very prominent position at JP Morgan Chase and Bank of China as its Managing Director. We're also very privileged to have Ayanna Hull with us today. Ayanna has over 15 years experience practicing a range of BVI commercial law and other very important legal activities. She's well known in the territory, and not only for her expertise in terms of law, but also she's the author of the territorial song of the Virgin Islands, O Beautiful Virgin Islands, which is a very patriotic and catchy anthem. Elaine Sun joins us. She's the Senior Executive and Chief Compliance Officer of Brtuomi Worldwide Limited, and also Compliance Director of Huobi Technology Holdings, and has an incisive knowledge of really being on the receiving end of operating in a sandbox. With a law degree as a professional gained in China and an MBA from Hong Kong University, again, about 20 years experience in the cutting edge of financial services, and formerly head of compliance at State Street APAC. Also, my former colleague, Glenford Malone, who is the acting deputy managing director, and in excess of 20 years experience, always at the cutting edge of innovation and regulatory development. And not only that, but he's a certified anti-money laundering specialist and a trained financial examiner in relation to IMF and FATF methodology for assessing compliance with the 40 recommendations plus 9 special recommendations of the FATF. So all of you, most welcome. Thank you for making time to join us here today. How we're going to structure this, I do have a series of questions which I'll direct to each of our panelists, but it's also very important we do hear from you, the audience. So in due course, we will be asking you to give your own questions. Equally, if you want to ask a question whilst we're in flow, please just signal accordingly. We'll do our best to respond. The beauty of today's event, it's a matter of regulator meeting regulated, and that sounds like an ideal marriage, certainly when they've consulted for so long. But I'd like to begin, please, with you, Glenford. Can you advise us about the volume and the trend in applications you're finding for the sandbox? Is there a focus on specific activities more than others, and perhaps you can elaborate on which ones?
Well, I think oftentimes the regulated and the regulated don't necessarily get to the marriage point. We start off in relationships where we oftentimes don't get to the marriage. And the interesting part about that is exactly what happens in the sandbox. I think we had so far 3 applicants, but we have a lot of inquiries. Many of the applicants' inquiries, we tend to stop at the beginning. Usually people who don't have a clear idea of what they're doing, people who haven't thought about it much. Sometimes it's people that don't get the right local counseling and figure it's a simple matter. But the people who have applied have been relatively high caliber people who have put their minds to it, have a good idea of what they want to do, been able to engage the commission pretty much in a technical manner. A lot of it is very technical. They have a very good idea of what they want to do and what they want to test. And to some extent, they've been able to convince the commission. What we see is a lot of it revolve around fintech, and practically 90% or 99% of it revolve around the virtual asset space. Unique ways of, well, I'm not sure anything in virtual asset now is unique given that everybody seems to be getting involved. But there's some unique mechanisms that they use in order to produce liquidity, to allow certain assets to be utilized, etc. So that's what we're seeing in that space. And from the Commission's perspective, the sandbox has never been, and we don't intend it to be, a voluminous area, but we intend it to be an area to assist people who have unique ideas and to be tested. I think, I know you'll be hearing from one of the sandbox participants and someone who's probably on their way out of the sandbox. But the issue is, it's not as straightforward as people think sometimes. You really have to convince us that what you're doing is worth doing and that you actually know what you're doing and you can protect investors. One of the things that we're ultimately concerned about in the Commission is the concept of the retail customer. And that is what we're seeing in the sandbox space and in the virtual asset space, where there is, in the BVI, usually most of the investment products, for example, are not retail products. But if you look at the virtual asset space, all of the products are retail investor products. And that's usually where we put the most consumer protection. But there is a lot of, as I say, appetite for people to want to get into the sandbox. I think to some extent, my expectation is that appetite will significantly decrease once we get the vast legislation in place, because that's where most of them will have to end up going.
Well, thank you very much. It sounds like part of the challenge might be not just the VASP legislation, which is going to be remedied, I think, this year, but there seems to be perhaps a gap in education and knowledge. And how do you think that can be addressed?
Well, there's several gaps if you use education and knowledge. One of the gaps is we have a very large service provider industry in the BVI. And frankly speaking, this skill is a unique skill to advise on this product. And we find a lot of people are advising on the product, and not all are advising as we would wish to the level we would like. So we have to be very careful and of the risk of that. There's also the fact that, listen, most of the people that come on the other side of the business are professional people. They are accustomed of this type of thing. They are customer supervision. On this other side, now, these are people that are brilliant in their own careers. They know this thing like the back of their head. They don't want to hear nothing about you and supervision. They just want supervision to facilitate their business. So that level of education has to be given, that if you're getting into the regulatory environment, there's going to be a lot of different questions asked. And, sometimes you get the issue of, in the minds of a lot of these technical people, the questions are foolish. But in the minds of a regulator, it's like, well, it's foolish because you understand it, but you need to be able to explain it to the layman so the retail investor could be protected.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Well, to ensure equilibrium, I'm now going to move over to the table on my right. And I'll start, if I may, with you, Elaine. As a fully fledged crypto exchange, can you share with us your experience of entering the sandbox and how are things working out?
Okay. Thank you, Simon. So our firms is the Huobi Exchange, the digital assets exchange. I would say one of the leading exchange in the world. And our exchange provides spot service as well as derivative crypto exchange service. And in the sandbox, where we applied right after the BVI Sandbox guideline have been issued within one or 2 months, is we believe that this sandbox has meet with both financial innovation purpose as well as the regulator. They do have a quite clear criteria and standard to be able to supervise the digital assets derivative exchange in the current Security and Future Act. So our core products is, as I said, is a digital assets exchange, which means the futures, contracts, swaps were available in the sandbox is one of our core essence for the client. We do offer the margin leverage for both retail and institutional clients. However, we set certain risk control as well as education, investment knowledge assessment for all the clients, not just the retail, but also professional investors. So what we do in terms of what the Commission just mentioned about invest protection is we will have a full educational questionnaire assessment to test these clients whether they have sufficient knowledge into the digital assets investment experience. And second is we also apply the high standard in terms of the AML KYC controls, which following exactly the FATF recommendation issued in 2019. And in addition, we also adopt 7 versus 24 hours, the real-time clearing and settlement mechanism to ensure our clients' exposure has been timely managed. I think this part is one of the difference which a digital assets exchange compare with the traditional derivative exchange. The traditional derivative exchange, for example, CME, when they're looking at the equity or other traditional investment products, you have the market closing times. You won't meet the real-time settlement and clearance. And second, where we see the innovation part in terms of the digital exchange is we do offer a transparent order book to both retail and professional investor. Think about in the traditional areas, as a retail investor, if you want to buy the derivative products, you might need to go through FCM, which is the broker-dealer in the US, and you cannot just directly access to the exchange market. So there's different layer of intermediary in the traditional finance area. But looking at the digital assets, it is less intermediary level in the trading part. So each as well, once the retail investor has passed the investment knowledge questionnaire assessment evaluation process, they got equal access and investment opportunity to like the professional investor. They got full access to our order book. They can see all these data transparently. So I think these are where our core products in the sandbox.
Good. Thank you very much, Elaine. I'd like to now switch over to the table on my left and really focus on Ayanna. Ayanna, you're a member of Harneys, one of the leading law firms. Can you share your experience of the sort of applications you're seeing coming in, and how much is there a consistency in standards? And perhaps are some firms struggling to explain their business cases in simple layman terms?
Sure. Thanks. So I head up the regulatory team on the ground in the BVI, and since about 2017 we've been very busy in the digital asset space. In terms of the sandbox applications, we've seen a lot of persons, as Glenford said, interested in coming to the BVI and asking about the sandbox. We probably had 2 serious applications. One of them, we finally made the application to the FSC, and that entity is now in the sandbox. It is sort of a Robinhood type platform where they are going to offer tokenized stocks and securities to their users and their investors. So it's a pretty good product. In terms of standardized, you really, 2 things I would say. There's the technical knowledge that you need to be up to speed with, and there's the legal aspect. On the technical side, it's not because it's so new to the BVI. It's not very easy to find a lot of people that understands crypto, understands blockchain, understands platforms, understand how it works. At Harneys, we actually hired someone that is a crypto geek who is an associate, and that person is in our Cayman Islands office. So what happens is that we have a fintech team internally where there are about 4 or 5 of us, and we all sit and analyze everything that comes through. And so we have the technical expertise and we have the legal expertise, and we rely on each other in terms of what's going on the ground. The cases that we have seen, when they come to us at first, we probably see like a business plan that's 1 page and not properly spelled out or thought out. And so we have to go to them, because I then have to go to Glenford, and he is very difficult, and say to them that, yeah, and say to them that this is not going to be adequate. And we have to be able to understand the business plan in order to present that to the FSC, because then we have the questions. And I think a lot of times, as Glenford said, actually, the clients know what they're doing. We're seeing in this space a lot of younger people. They're not 40 and 50 years old. They're 26-year-olds. They're billionaires, and they understand what they're doing. And so they don't have a lot of time to waste with legal practitioners who don't understand their product. They just expect you to know what it is, and they expect the FSC to know what it is too. So we have to sit down with them, understand what they're telling us, get that into a business plan so that we can present that to the FSC. In terms of how we present that information, and it takes, I would say that a good application would probably take maybe 3 to 6 months back and forth with the FSC if it's a good application. But the business plan that we submitted was probably, if to give you an estimate, was probably about 20 pages long. And so if you're going to start the process with just bullet points, it's not going to provide enough information. The FSC comes back and they ask a lot of questions, because on the platform itself, you're really accessing everyone in the world. They can go on and they can buy a tokenized, they can buy 1/5 of an Apple share through some of these platforms. And the FSC is concerned about protecting the end user. So there's a lot of involvement in terms of them explaining exactly what they're doing, how what their revenue model looks like, how they intend to really earn this revenue. And the sandbox for us has never been something that we understood was for well-established like crypto exchanges. It was intended to be for startups, and it was intended to, after the virtual asset guidelines came out, was intended to just fill a gap until VASP came into play. So while we've seen a lot of persons coming to us asking us to go into the sandbox, we know well enough to let them know that this is not the type of application that needs to go in the sandbox. And we think that's where a lot of the industry has gone wrong. I think everybody thinks that everything needs to go into the sandbox. And I probably do maybe 10 opinions a month since January last year, just on ICOs and digital exchanges. And we have said to all of them, VAS will be in. We thought it was March, and then we thought it was June, and now we don't know when it is. But we've said to them, VASP is going to come, and you're either going to fit in VASP as a token issuer under the registration regime or under the full licensing regime. At the moment, it's not required, the product is not required to be regulated as long as it doesn't qualify as a security. So we've allowed, based on our KYC and our AML standards, we've allowed a lot of these entities that thought they needed to be in the sandbox to have their operation. And then when VASP comes into place, we will grandfather them in. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, many of these applications do not belong in the sandbox. We do not think that many of them need to get there unless they believe that their product is one that they desire protection in terms of not needing functionaries that they have to pay a lot for. If they're starting up, they want to test this fintech, and they need to be in a secure, regulated space. So,
great. Well, no, thank you very much. I mean, it sounds like VASP is going to act as a great navigational tool. And as I get back to Wellington, time spent in reconnaissance is never wasted. So it's going to be worth it, I'm sure.
One other thing I'll say, Simon, is it's very important, and I think Elaine touched on it, the KYC elements, because what the FSC is trying to remedy is FATF recommendation 15, which is that all these digital assets foster money laundering, terrorist financing, proliferation, financing, and so on. So what we explain to, and we just had this conversation internally yesterday, we've turned away a lot of work because the digital space is supposed to decentralize. And the view is that if you're decentralizing, then you shouldn't require all the things that centralized banking and centralized operations require. So we have a lot of clients that come to us and say, well, our competitors are not taking AML on their clients, why should we? And so we say to them, well, from a business risk standpoint, Harneys is not interested in the work if you're not going to do KYC, and neither will the FSC. So that's very important as well. And many of them, some of the service providers say to them it's not relevant business, but we say to our clients, even though it's not relevant business as yet, conduct your crypto platform as if it is, because when VASP comes in, we expect corresponding changes in AML, and that will get you into the space where you have to collect AML on those clients anyway, and we can't see you getting into the sandbox unless we can show the FSC what you're doing. So that's very important as well.
No, that's an excellent point, and certainly something that the territory does not want to compromise in any way. It's anything which will fall foul of global standards and regulations. Lisa, you've been very patient. I wonder, you're the president of a digital bank, Bank of Asia. Can you describe how you've been servicing the financial services industry in terms of digital offerings?
It's great to hear all the comments, and also, it's remind me really one thing I want to share in terms of being a digital bank as well as serving the digital assets. For us, it's a learn to grow process. And reason for that is, when the bank was set up about 3 years ago, at the beginning, because this is a truly BVI bank, because the mission for the bank set up is that to help the BVI registered companies to get banking access, open the bank account and provide the banking service. And we adopted the model is the fully digital platform. So in the way that our headquarters is here, we do have teams in different locations. However, the service delivery from day one is entire digital platform. It's at the beginning, it's a fintech innovation already. And at that time, I think we do have the first move advantage to some extent, and also maybe the whole world complain about the COVID, but one good thing we get out of the COVID is just the COVID literally prevent people that to go physically into the bank branch to get the banking service. So where we're seeing during the COVID time, because we're kind of grow and also started the business in the middle of the COVID, because we started the formal operation in 2020, and then past the 2 years, our volume in terms of new clients that increased 17 times,
And also in terms of the jurisdiction we're covering, currently we have clients in terms of where they registered that from 90 jurisdictions. So I think that first is this digital, what I want to share from our life experience. At the beginning when we said it seems it's a trend, it's a proven to be a trend. So one way or another, we need to think about how we deal with this trend and how to go with that. So this is from the very beginning, the platform-wise, digital platform. And starting from the not only from the digital platform, more and more, because our experience and what we're observation is actually more from our clients, what our clients need, what they say, what they want to get into. So what we observed from our client base, that just increasingly getting the inquiry that we are the company that involved in the digital assets related business. This can be exchange, can be a funds company that have both a traditional portfolio but has a crypto portfolio as well. And also later on is more and more the private fund setup in BVI that's actually more on fully cryptoed investment institution. And further on that, of course, you have the whole investor base, retail or the corporate part, and also like a lot of quite some discussion on the security token here, and then the security token exchange. That I do see BVI has made progress in that regard. So this is all the the players in the industry, and also those are the players gradually they grow very rapidly, and also out of them they grow into an ecosystem. And then in terms of that, I think we all know this so tech related, and also previously this is like a 20-30 years old that communications their game or their life, but quite remote to a lot of people. So that's why I'm back to the learn to grow. So for us, that for this industry, that it's you see the clear trend, the demand is there. It's just more people get into that. Our approach response is that you just got to learn. And then the good way to learn a couple of things, I think if you're looking at, internally, not only hiring the fintech people, and also from our senior management, senior executives, for Bank of Asia, actually among the senior executives is all 50 plus and 60. Our our existing chairman is close to 70, and then he talks about metaverse. He talks about all the fancy word. I know that literally on every day, probably he talk to different people and read the materials and the learnings. That's how we build also the culture. So then for the company to grow and then to capture the opportunity, that's learn the culture wise. And how to learn is my observation and also the experience I want to share is actually by example. I fully agree where our regulator talk about is can't be volume doesn't mean anything, and then some good example, and out of that example, how to learn the real things and how to replicate. So that's a good way to get this business developed. So currently we are digital friendly, and then particularly promoted by Vice Chairman Lorna. She's actually another good example, very good at learning. Yeah, so we provide the kind of servicing all the crypto players.
Great, thank you very much, Lisa. Before I've got a whole load of other questions, but I'll open it up to the floor in a second. But I just want to make one observation, and that is that there is a common theme here. It's about obviously quality of applications, but education. And it's perhaps worth reminding ourselves that a very important development in the past few months has been the design and implementation of a university diploma level training program between BVI Finance, the Robert McTavish Institute of Financial Services, generous sponsorship from the BVI government as well. And obviously BVI Finance and the National University of Singapore, led by Professor Carter. And that is designed really to upskill people globally, but certainly in the BVI. And I think that may go some extent to alleviating some of the challenges that are being faced. So a credit to all of those involved. It's great to have Elise here and Derry, both of whom have been very much vociferous and pioneers of developing this program. I do have a whole load of more questions, just in case you don't have any, but could I open the floor in case anyone would like to ask something? Michelle.
Yes, thank you.
Good. I think there's a microphone coming your way.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this, providing this space, and the guest speakers as well. I was just wondering, based on the experience you have had, especially in the regulatory space, of evaluating all the application, would it be suitable to issue some sort of a guidance note on a minimum of a suitable application, so it serves for those that are interested in saying, well, if you're going to apply, and to kind of move out from any application that would not be suitable. So we can also promote more the sandbox, and based on the experience so far. So when the application is presented, at least it is in line or aligned with what would be expected by the regulator. If that is something that could be of help for both the regulator and us to promote more of the sandbox.
Thanks, Michelle. I think, Glenford, any thoughts initially?
That would be ideal, but we just can't do it now because we just don't know what an ideal application looks like. Technically, the guidelines that are on the website for general applications apply. There is, again, a sandbox is a unique thing. You're supposed to have a unique idea, a unique way of doing it, and supposed to be able to convince the commission to put you in the sandbox. So it's difficult for us to issue guidance. Again, not to say there's particularly different issues on the other side, but the thing with sandbox application is, again, that the technical people know what they want. They need the proper advisors to assist them in communicating that over to the commission. And whilst I have the table, I would also say I implore most people, everyone in the industry, that this type of business should be classified at high risk in your risk assessment when you look at this. I think, we talked about, Ayanna spoke about telling clients that they can carry on business because it's not required to be licensed, which is appropriate. I wouldn't go and tell her not to tell them that. But the fact of the matter is think about it from what you see in the news, and think about what I said earlier, that most of virtual asset space is retail investors. You have a BVI business company that is a virtual asset exchange. It has 200,000 clients, all of which are retail. I don't know if you watch the news, but these exchanges seem to go poof and they disappear. You can't find anybody. Those 200,000 investors are going to complain to the commission. That's a fact. And wherever those 200,000 investors are based, those regulators are going to come to the commission for information. Those regulators are going to be looking for people. And we're going to be looking for you, who's the agent of those people, to make sure that you did what you're supposed to do. Make sure you're understanding the risk posed. I'm not saying you need to go into your client's business and manage their business risk, but you need to understand what the risk posed by those clients are. But I think, going back to your question, you're right. It would be helpful if we could have put out something that clearly says, this is what we want in terms of bullet points from a sandbox application, but I've not seen any application that is the same. They all have these wonderful, unique way of, and I use the term, making money hand over fist. Sorry, I don't know if everyone is, but it just, they have good ideas in my mind. I might say this frightening idea to some extent, simply because it's a new type of thing. I would also say again, I agree with Ayanna's point, and I think the other panelist's point is AML is a huge issue. I would like to think that most people should be informing the clients. They should do some form of AML on the people who they take on, or else there's going to be significant issues going. And I would venture to say when VAS comes in place, it's not going to be a straightforward onboarding process for the commission. I suspect, and I'll be frank, a lot of people who's going to be undertaking that activity is not going to meet our standards. Just given what we've seen in the sandbox and the proposals, a lot of people are not going to meet our standards. So you might have 15 people that does this. You might want to make 15 applications. Many of them are not going to be proceeding because it's going to be a very high threshold. And it's, frankly speaking, I think a lot of the people that does this have to be engaged with their local service provider so they could start putting the steps in place from now, so that when VAS come into place, they could get a smooth, easy transition. And the smooth, easy transition, key to it is implement the AML regime from now. If you do that from now, your transition is going to be very smooth.
Can I just add something to that?
Yes, of course I am.
Just in terms of, like, when SEBA came in 2010, we had the same issues in terms of what looks like an ideal application for a manager or an advisor, whether it's a custodian or broker-dealer. And I think probably within 6 months to a year, we were able to see what an application should look like. So just to support what Glenford is saying, the sandbox regime is fairly new, and all these young people, as I'm saying, mostly, they have some different idea in terms of how they're going to make $100 million in the next year. They all don't look the same. But I think over time, as with the legacy business now, that we can turn around an investment manager, advisor, custodian application with our eyes closed. And I think eventually we'll get there in the sandbox. It probably wouldn't have a lot of volume, but there'll still be a space after VAS comes in for persons who really do need that regulatory protection as they test their fintech product. And then the other thing I'll say in terms of the KYC bit, I used to be a regulator. So I see from, even as a practitioner standpoint, the problems that we can have as a jurisdiction later on if all the stakeholders in the industry don't understand the importance of AML. And so what we do as an internal process, just I did say that they can do the business now because that's the truth. We have to analyze SEBA, we have to analyze the Banks and Trust Companies Act, we have to analyze the Financing and Money Services Act, we have to analyze the AML legislation before we can produce what is like a 15-page opinion to say to someone whether you can do business now or not. When we do that, we say to them, even though your activity doesn't fall under AML as relevant business, because it doesn't, if it's not a security token, the other issues you have to make sure that the token that they're issuing doesn't have security characteristics. If it doesn't, then legally we can say to them, you can operate as a standard BVI business company. However, that's the legal side. Our firm, our management firm, Harneys Fiduciary Services, will not onboard a client even though they don't have to satisfy the AML legislation if they are not prepared to do that, if they're operating crypto business. So it's the same thing. Even though legally we say that to them, we go through an internal risk committee that will not accept that business if they're not prepared to do AML. And what we're seeing is that we are holding a very high standard, and there are other service providers that are saying if it's not necessary, don't do it. So those entities will clash with VAS when they come into play, because then VAS is going to hold the AML standard at that level. So that's very important to understand.
Well, thank you for reinforcing the message. Elise, I think you have a question.
To respond to what both Glenford and Ayanna are saying in terms of the future of the regulatory regime, VAS, when it's introduced, and that some businesses will not meet the requirement. How do we not end up in the position where we regulate ourselves out of the business or the sweet spot, as some say, that we are in now? How do we maintain the attractiveness or the competitiveness of the jurisdiction in this industry, since we are very attractive now and there seems to be a lot of persons that are setting up in the jurisdiction, whether they fall into the regulatory space or will fall into the regulatory space. But how do we maintain that business and create the right balance so that, you mentioned SEBA, and some would argue that with the introduction of SEBA, we sort of lost the competitive edge in the fund space, so to speak. So how do we end up in the right spot and have the competitive advantage and the right balance?
I'll just go from the transactional practitioner standpoint, and then I guess Glenford can do the regulatory. I mean, Cayman has always had the advantage on the BVI in the fund space. So I don't know if SEBA was an improvement on the Mutual Funds Act. I don't think we would have been any further ahead if we didn't introduce it as it concerns to Cayman. I think it's just the type of business that we're involved in. But in terms of losing our competitive edge, right now, the BVI is probably the most attractive, as you said, in terms of that space amongst the offshore centers. And SEMA, as we understand it, does not want to touch this business at all at the moment. The draft of VASP that we have seen, because I sit on the working group, is still very user-friendly, and that's what we have said to our clients. And so we have not advised anyone in this space that doesn't know that VASP is coming. And as a part of our legal opinion, that we explain what VASP will do to that particular structure. So I don't think from a practitioner standpoint, we're very concerned that VASP will throw our clients out of kilter in terms of the BVI being a sweet spot. But we do have to, it goes back to the risk and the AML. So because we're ahead, I think, of Cayman at the moment, and we understand where Cayman is going because we have the offices there, we have been able to convince Glenford to ensure that the product remains friendly. And I think the FSC has tried to do a good job at that. So from the industry perspective, we expect that when VASP comes into place, the majority of our clients will be able to sail under that and be comfortable. And as long as we keep ahead of our main competitor, which is Cayman, what we find Cayman has been useful for, I don't know if anybody else has seen it, but most of the token issuers, they want a memberless foundation, a memberless entity. The BVI doesn't have foundation legislation. So there's a partnership with the Cayman Islands to produce that foundation to them, and that has been helpful. So the BVI is doing the token issuers, we're handling the exchanges, Cayman is coming in to handle the foundation. And I think as long as we keep that dialectic, that dynamic, then the BVI should take off and be the digital asset space, much like Cayman has done it for the institutional funds, and with proactive legislation and bulldogs there. Most of these clients also want to be regulated because they want to be able to take that around the world. Their only issue is because they're dealing with 200,000 and 300,000 people at a time because it's retail. They don't want the burden of AML. But what we've said to them is that this stuff works until it doesn't. And so we are getting our clients more understanding that even though you're decentralized, the burden of anti-money laundering does not disappear. And I think it's just education, and it's continuing to reinforce that, and for them to understand that you're going to run into problems with the regulator if that is not where you are.
Thank you, both of you. I'm conscious that with Lisa and Elaine, we do have two very important practitioners on the receiving end of all of these new regulations. Any comment from either one of you? Lisa, perhaps?
Sorry,
I think the concern was expressed at the risk of over-regulating.
First, because as I said, our firms, we are dealing with the global regulators. We have a designated compliance teams looking for different jurisdiction licensing requirements. So I think what we talk about now at the BVI, as Simon just mentioned, not be the first, you have some advantage, which is true because you can learn from others, right? So I think in the beginning of the regulators, when they look at the VSP, they know this is important and they want to supervise, because you cannot just let people running outside of control. How with some of the industry impact your local citizen, as well as the huge market value you cannot ignore. So in the first challenge in terms of the industry versus the regulator is we don't understand each other's language, because from the digital assets, where it's coming more than 13 years ago, the first Bitcoin white paper issued in 2008, first Bitcoin opened, has been mined in 2009. Those people are the pure technology background. They don't do financial institutions. They don't using the terminology where we use in the banking sectors. So, but this is their word. They created and developed till now, where the whole world now we access to it. And from other side, the regulator, they more and more understand the importance of the industry. So they want to know this industry. So I think in the beginning, it's need to have educational for both sides to understand each other. As Anna just mentioned, where also what we observed is majority of the market player, we want to be licensed, because being licensed means you are recognized by the major world, means you pay tax, you have been got all the accessible market infrastructure like Lisa just mentioned. This is one of the challenge for the most market player is the banking doesn't want to play the service for you, because the banking is at the traditional side, while the digital assets, you are from different world. So being licensed meaning everyone is happy and to use the same framework, laws and regulations to operate the business, which can benefit the whole world. So I think education is one of the challenge. But how we handle that in the past 3 to 4 years, personally, my opinion is I see the regulatory regime globally in terms of the recognition of the digital assets and using the right approach to supervise this industry has growing extremely fast. And two parties and more, they close to each other and understand each of the language. I want to share one example, just a small example, but it might be illustrate some of the concern we just talked about, why some of the DeFi person, they don't like to do the KYC or maybe lack of AML controls for those transfer assets on-chain. So I would begin from what's the blockchain's nature. People might understand that blockchain, they facilitate the maintenance of the records, right? Because that means some of in the traditional assets, you will heard the cooking of the book. But if you're using the blockchain technology, you will make it cooking book most difficult to operate. And the other blockchain's nature is traceable. Even so, lots of the ledger is anonymous, but because of the traceable natures, you still can able to trace the flow of fund. The example I want to use is the BitTrax attack back to 2016 August. And you will see the news, I think in February, there's lots of people talking about that attacks. But some of the money has been archived. Then the US, their legal processing is calling back the victims. But think about when the cyber attack happened back to 2016, why those financial crimes cannot withdraw those, stolen Bitcoin? Because those wallet address has been labeled. And because each of the asset transfer is identifiable and it's permanent in the record. So as the exchange or the industry, we do have very good business partner in the market who provide AML on-chain service. And even for our exchange, we have a designated legal security compliance teams looking for on-chain analysis and alerts taking. Because those wallet address has been labeled, any movement from that address, it doesn't matter how many mixed tools you have using, how many labeling you have to, washed, as long as they from the original stolen wallet address, each of the exchanges, as long as we apply the compliance standards for the AML tracing, you are able to identify that. And once we identify that, the exchanges, the licensed exchange, I will say, will frozen their money and report to the regulator under the FIU. Then later they will go to the US because the BitTrax is, their victim is claiming those legal issues in the US. So I'm using this small example just to provide a concept that we are under the same laws and regulation in terms of AML, because FATF not only supervise the digital assets, but also supervise the traditional financial institution. However, the approach to how to comply with the same requirement is different because of the nature of the blockchain technology, because of the innovative where the digital assets industry has been applied. We might have diversified compliance approach to compliance with the same standard compared with the traditional banking financial institutions.
Thank you very much. Dion, you've been very patient. May I have your question, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. Dion, Food Bank of Asia. Now, we had quite a bit of discussion of the sandbox. One of the areas that I'd like to support the panelists is that the business risk and the regulatory risk, as well as the AML, is very important to be articulated in the sandbox. And we've seen that coming out more and more as an important topic of discussion with clients. Now, given that we have Elaine here, I'd like to ask her if she can elaborate some more on what have been seen in the news more and more, which is the changes in the regulatory from jurisdiction to jurisdiction on how they handle crypto or digital assets, because various countries have been discussing and debating how exactly they will handle the various assets. If you have some insight for us, it would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the question. I will say let's start from the US, which is currently still leading the whole digital assets development, business development, as well as the regulatory regimes. So in March 9, the Biden president just issued the executive order in terms of how to ensuring the whole country has make sure the digital assets is one of the critical industry, and encourage all the departments across not federal level as well as state level to work together on that. The key message is they are looking for a unified framework to guide the digital assets, even though the US industry has very innovative in the digital assets industry promotion since 2016, 2018, but they are still lacking of a very certainty requirement in terms of who regulates what. I think that's the first thing. And second thing is the Biden, the government, they also raised the point about the financial stability, because looking at several data, the 3 trillion is the market value for the digital assets world and end of last year. And the second number is there's more than 16% of the US citizen has already buy the digital assets, which in terms of the population is 40 million of US citizens. And the third numbers where they point out is there's more than 100 countries either plan or in progress to discuss their CBDC, which is a central bank digital currency. So all these things will make sure the digital assets, the financial stabilities and national securities positions into the US. So I think from the US perspective, once that executive order launched, it will accelerate once the regulations is more clear and coordination among multiple regulators in the US, the industry will grow fast as what we expected. And the old money from Wall Street, some of them already into this industry, but lots of the traditional financial institutions like the bank, like those pension fund or these big fund managers, they are waiting for more clear laws and regulations before they can enter into this potential high growth industry. This is from US, which is quite developed country. But we also see like offshore island or some of the new trade zone, they also promote digital assets as one of their countries, one of the strategy directions. I will use Dubai as example because they are recently launches. First, they issued the law for the VASP in later last year, but they recently just approved Binance as one of the world's biggest exchanges in Dubai under their specialty they called regimes. How they handle that within this short period after the law issuance, just 1 or 2 months, they just got the license and approval. Not just Binance, there are others coming as well. I think several things where we can take reference. One is they have a designated teams who are working as the Digital Assets Association or commissions. So they're full teams from the regulator's perspective with the knowledge of this industry and looking at this. And second thing is they hear from the industry before they are launching the VSP laws and regulations, especially as I mentioned, even we under the same laws and regulations, we don't sacrifice investor protections, we don't sacrifice AML and KYC, but the way how to comply with those requirements, it will be a bit different from the digital assets industry angle. So the regulator, they also recognize you are using some of the new approach to comply with the requirement under the same spirit.
Yeah, actually, just want to add on a little bit on this one. Because other than the jurisdiction, I think we all heard the challenge is always the same. But then for a location here is more of that what we do. Or particular, like, Elise talk about that, where is the balance, how to achieve the balance. I think in terms of that word, how we achieve the balance, first of all, other than looking around the jurisdiction development, the industry itself quite some of development in the way that provided the risk mitigant. One thing is that looking at the crypto world, start from the beginning, very little service provider, because bank like us probably we position in the leading way to provide a banking service, and then the later on, now we're looking at previously for a company like looking for director insurance, you wouldn't have them, but now actually you do. So and also for the audit, particular on the AML audit, because we talk about all the risk, and then where are the tools that can help the regulator and help the stakeholder to do a better job, and then now the like the AML audit is kind of possible as well. So that's actually helped the industry to grow. So one thing I think in terms of risk mitigant part, you see the industry develop in the way provide a lot of risk mitigant, and the other side who are participating, particular on the licensed entity we talk about. Because if we focus on at the beginning, this is more like a retail game, but why the exchange, like the BWL themselves is used to be like the very large exchange, but why they want to go to the regulated or getting the license, one bigger drive, and where we see from our client base as well, because the traditional financial institution, particularly the institutional investors, like Vanguard, Fidelity, now you're looking at BlackRock, that type of players, now they come into the digital, so they need to work with, and they are committed to work with regulated entity. So that's where this the landscape is no longer a retail play. So that's where also another way drive the industry, and as well as to grow the business. But then the question comes, who can be find a good way to grow and meanwhile learning. So back to the balance part, still this is where I observed in a lot of emerging country how they promote or try to promote a new thing, and meanwhile took a balanced way to control the risk. So before you have all the legislations, a clear framework, you allow somebody to have a play. So, it's a small group. You can't be a big group, but you observe them, different parties, how they play this one. You allow a little bit the risk as well. And when the older parties understand how they works, this is where the regulation comes in. Because it's the same thing within the bank's business, that with the servicing the crypto clients, we adopt almost AML or the common sense, the traditional risk model. Because as Elaine mentioned, you got to know your KYC, you got your risk. But actually working with them, we understand in practical where are the possible risk and how we put the mitigant. So I think that's, in short, for the BVI, I'm just thinking when Elaine talked about Bahama, talking about other countries, now Bahama not long ago has gone out to US in terms of promoting that country. So what are we going to say on the next trip for BVI? So,
Illicit activity, always topical, but particularly now that the war is going very badly for Putin, thankfully, but he's probably going to have to be very inventive and creative in his fiendish plans if he wants to survive. And US competitiveness on a global stage, financial inclusion, which perhaps also is an element of education, but responsible innovation as well. And let's all remember that jam today must never mean risk tomorrow. We don't want to incubate risk for the future. We do have time for a couple more questions, if anyone would like to volunteer.
I'll just go ahead. Glenford, I know you're under a lot of pressure to get fast on the wheel. Because, we have a number of clients, and I think, we mentioned the sandbox, and when they look at the time frame for the sandbox, etc. But once you mentioned VAS, that's what they're looking for. They're waiting to see when this will come into place. So they can make specific, sort of decisions in terms of that, because that should be more streamlined, etc. So I think what we're seeing is clients are saying, no, we won't try the sandbox. We want to see exactly what's happening with that. So where are we in terms of that? In terms of time frame, etc. at the moment.
You sure we have time, Simon? But I think that let me just go back, and I want to address Elie's point because I know she wants me to address it, and it would address your point as well. There's a lot of risk in this industry, but we have already accepted as a jurisdiction that we want to be a player in this industry. That's fine. Whether you're from the regulator, the government, or the industry, I think all three have agreed we want to be a player in this industry. So from that perspective, it is not our goal to over-regulate. But this industry is very, very risky. And there's a lot of issues that, greater than there would otherwise be in other industries, simply because of the number of clients. I don't know if anybody in the world have a real good understanding of how to wind up a digital exchange. That is something, because they're new. They're not something, And if you think about exchanges and stock exchanges, there are not many of them around the world. And they're usually self-regulated and easily to, they're for profit and they could just go away like so. Here's an exchange that is for business, that has all of these clients. They have the clients' money. They have all of these things. So there's some difficulty there. So we don't foresee that we would be overly burdensome, but we would be very a high level of supervision from an AML CFT perspective, because that's where we see the risk. I think my colleagues mentioned about the uniqueness about the blockchain and how you would carry out KYC and all of that. But there's also a flip side of the blockchain, is if you don't do the KYC at the beginning, by the time you get to the end of the blockchain, a lot of things have already occurred. So then, and who has the expertise to go in and look at this blockchain? The US and that 3.6 billion that they just recovered, it took them a lot of years, and they have a lot of resources. I don't know if the BVI have the resources to do that. I don't know if the players in the BVI want to pay for the BVI to do that, because this is going to be an industry where we're not going to be able to subsidize from a different industry. You have to pay for your supervision. That's the model effectively that the commission is moving towards. If you're high risk you have to pay for that supervision. So I think people need to somewhat understand that level as well. We have to consider from a jurisdiction perspective, what do we want out of this industry? Do we want someone who just pays fees, or do we want clients like on our right who are physically here in the BVI, have a vested interest in the BVI, willing to put boots on the ground? These are the things you have to consider in terms of the industry. So I think that addresses Elise's concern. Yes, I think, and I'll be frank, we all learned from our experience with SEBA. There was some good things with SEBA, there was some not so good things, frankly speaking. So we all would learn from that as we build, but we fully well know that people, like any other industry, that are not going to be able to meet your requirements. That's just factually how life occurs. So what we want people to do is to encourage their clients. AML is where you're going to demonstrate a lot of compliance with the commission. In terms of the vast legislation, we sort of put a pause on some of the things we were doing because FATF were making changes in October. Now that they're finished and all the changes to the guidance have been approved, and we've started to make changes to the draft to take into account those changes. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth because I've done that several times on this VAS, as Ayanna rightfully pointed out. But the issue is that I am hopeful, and I believe by the end of June, we will have something out for public consultation, because it's going to be a public consultation document, and everyone would have their views on how we should deal with it. I think it's a bit streamlined. The focus group made a lot of valuable comments. We're aiming to have this thing supervised prior to 2023. So by that time, we should have legislation in place, and we should be accepting applications by that time.
It's really, thank you very much for your presentations. It really stems from something that Glenford said about, he didn't go into any depth, so I'm going to ask the question now. Because Elaine, if she graduates from the sandbox and she gets her license, she's not going to stay here. She's going to go back to China. What are the benefits to us here in the British Virgin Islands of her getting this license if she were to get it?
This is my first time in BVI. I would say I fall in love with this island after around 2 months, right? More than 2 months. It would depend. Lorna is right, because I leading our exchange's global footprint for the licensed entity. So I also have other projects. But looking at the BVI, how it differentiates with other countries where we currently either got licensed or plan to not get licensed, we will looking at different angles, but particularly in commercial sense, which jurisdiction can help the company grow fast in an ordinary way. I think that's why I see the different laws and the different global regulator, they also fighting for the same thing. Singapore announced they want to be the crypto center. Hong Kong also claim they're the international financial center, definitely should moving digital assets in. US, Japan, Dubai, every country and location, they are looking for the same. So personally, I would be loving here, and I will like to see the progress in the BVI's commission in terms of the digital assets, because Glenford just mentioned, as the country, as the jurisdiction, there's no doubt to put digital assets as the country's strategy. But the challenge is how to implement that strategy and how to attract the market player in the island rather than in the cloud. So I think that's the thing.
No, what I don't think what I was getting at is BWI gets a license.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are there any benefits to us? Am I going to get a job? Am I going to...
I see.
That's what I'm
saying. Okay.
In terms of the benefits to the country itself.
I see. I think several ways as what we invested in other jurisdictions. The first one is global strategy, go overseas is one of our exchange's key strategies. So that's why we are moving outside. And by saying that, we do value, because currently our exchange's current assets portfolio is majority from Asia. We are looking for Euro as well as the Americas as a whole, the Latin America, which is very potential area. So one of the things I think is the employment movement in terms of to have the client center as well as the operational hub in the BVI, but that will also depend on several things which I make it quite clear as the commercial sense in terms of the infrastructure, whether it's ready to support as a global exchange. We're moving here in terms of the immigration process, in terms of, I know BVI is tax-free, however, there are still other living costs you need to consider as the logistic. So this is one thing. And second challenge so far we have seen is the employment resources. As just Simon, you mentioned, BVI is well known for the financial service, but among these thousands of the financial service company, how many resources or available resources, I will say, is competency in the digital assets industry. I see very good initiative from the BVI Finance as well as the college. You launch this FinTech course as one of the support for the local citizen to gain the digital assets knowledge. I think that's very good start. And from our company, if allows, we also wish to support from more practical angles in terms of the course and employment resources.
Maybe I can add a bit more on. I think one is the neighboring country already a real case, and then secondly, probably from I can share more. That what Elaine is actually doing here, so that you can get a sense on what's happening. One is that back to our I think good reference because Bahama is so close. So I think people know FTX is a company from entrepreneur from zero grow into a 30 billion valuation company today. And that's starting from that because they get the license, started activity in Bahama, and now make Bahama just out of this exchange, and they can proudly say that they are really the ideal destination because they support a company to grow to such a big players. And associated with that as a reality is that FTX has more than 100, 200 staffs there, and then a significant in terms of the purchase and the rental of the villas there, and also with FTX there, because it's the center, it's attracted associated the brokers, the banking, because that significantly drive up the service around this exchange, and that's how we're talking about the ecosystem, build. And of course that rather than the private jet, the cruise, I think is where the private boat is more like addition. And then so for back to Elaine, because I had the chance to closely observe what she's doing here, because I try to make her working around safely. So she went to see loads of I together with her almost all the villas here on the island and Virgin Gorda, and then she visited the college. Has an in-depth discussion with that for the college student, and actually that's where follow on we have the discussion exchange the banks and the BVI Finance, how together we actually talking about this whole education. It's not only for the generation here. This is crypto and digital is more for the future generation, not only behind, not leading position. Now it's more like a catching up. Because looking at the population in Asia and in US, how many percentage of the 20s are involved in the trading, and how they open up the whole world. So that's I think for the employment in terms of the profile for the market, for the country, for the industry, as well as those very real things bring in. That's just the life example, and then this happening right now. But the other thing is, you know, this crypto, this whole world, if you get into that, it just the speed is everything. And their pension span is very short. That's just unfortunate.
Well, no, thank you very much. That was very erudite and very, very informative. I'm afraid the allotted time has now expired, but before I thank our panelists, I would like to say there's an expression, from small acorns, large oak trees can grow. And I think what we've had created with our sandbox is a pretty impressive acorn, and it's going to grow for all the right reasons. And an oak tree often has a longevity of 200 to 300 years. That might be a little bit optimistic in the world of fast-changing crypto, but I am very confident that the consultation process conducted by the Commission, the participation by the industry, most recently we've heard from Glenford with the VASP law, is a very good sign of things to come. So I hope you'll all join by thanking Lisa and Elaine, Glenford and Ayanna very much, and please join me. And if you didn't get your brown bag, we have extra, so do please take them home with you. But thank you all very much for your valuable time.
Thank you, organizing.